just went with the best player on their board, which may be smart. You know, a lot of times that's the way you're supposed to do it. I understand that. But it's not like I think that now catapults them over the Eagles. Let's look at last season. The Cowboys had everything they needed except maybe the coach last season. None of us thought Garrett was the guy, but he's not an awful coach. He's kind of a league average-ish coach. So you put that with the quarterback who's about to get paid $35 million a year in a legit number one wideout, an elite running back. Okay, the linebackers didn't play great, but on paper, boy, that looked like a crew. They had the offense, the defense, everything you needed, and they didn't make the playoffs last year, and that's in spite of how banged up the Eagles were, including on the offensive line, which, as it turned out by the end of the season, was an elite offensive line for the Eagles. So the Cowboys' offensive line regressed, likely to regress again, based on age, retirement, all that. The Eagles are returning a line where if they could just stay healthy, might be at least as good as last year. Hard not to get regression if you're elite one year, but they may be again. In fact, you'd suspect they will be again. If the receivers just stay healthy and they got a guy who could take the lid off the defense, even if it's not the guy that the fans wanted. Carson Wentz, Dan and I disagree about Carson Wentz. I thought he had a bad season last year. By his standards, still a top half of the league quarterback, but clearly has top 5 potential, something I don't think Dak has right now. Maybe at some point in the not too near future, but I think Carson Wentz has that right now. But if you just look at last season, the Cowboys were the healthy team. The Cowboys were the loaded team. I felt Wentz really underperformed. Everyone got, and the Eagles still got out of the NFC East. So why this upcoming season? Because of an extra wideout and a new coach for Dallas, and we haven't seen how that's all going to play out. Should that change? Nope. I still like the Eagles. I think the Eagles are likely to be better this upcoming season than they were last year.
Believe it or not, I believe it's going to be the Dallas Cowboys that are going to be better. Now, obviously, pressure breaks pipes, and we all know Dallas's penchant to cave when pressure mounts. So I'm definitely smiling at that prospect. However, to be real, I think when you look at their roster and you look at their talent and what they bring to the table, we can't ignore the fact that this team has a juggernaut of an offense. Defensively, could they improve? Of course. They lost a corner in the offseason. We know they've got to address certain situations. We understand that. But when you look at what ailed the Cowboys as last season waned, it was what they couldn't do offensively. Ezekiel Elliott wasn't getting the ball enough. Receivers were dropping passes. Obviously, Amari Cooper was a no-show in a couple of pivotal situations. One time he wasn't even on the field. I think it was against the Eagles, if I remember correctly. Maybe you can remind me of that, Dan. But in the end, here's the reality of the situation. You've got Amari Cooper. You've got Terrence Williams. You still have Ezekiel Elliott. You still have a stout offensive line. Dak Prescott threw for nearly 5,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, completing over 65% of his passes. But somehow, some way, we still want to get on him. And then, oh, by the way, now you've added another receiver who's produced in the slot. I think I heard Michael Irvin point out last night that he only played the slot about 30% of the time or something like that, but he was effective while doing so. I'm not sure that's the number he used, but I think it was. In the end, what it comes down to is if you got a receiver like CeeDee Lamb, and that's the guy replacing Randall Cobb, and you add Terrence Williams and Amari Cooper to that, along with the fact that those two have played with Dak Prescott, so they're familiar targets. So you've added youth and speed to an already credible receiving crop. You still have Ezekiel Elliott with Dak Prescott, and you have your offensive line. I think the Dallas Cowboys will put up points. I think they will put up numbers in that regard. I think that will offset some of the things that might ail the defense. Mike McCarthy is there now, even though Kellen Moore is still there. You've got Mike McCarthy there instead of Jason Garrett. I think all of those things point to the Dallas Cowboys being legitimate favorites in the NFC East, although I really, really do like the receiver out of TCU that the Eagles picked up. I really like him, but I still believe that the Dallas Cowboys should be the favorites in the NFC East right now.
Yeah, the Cowboys were the favorites last night for like 30 minutes because once they took CeeDee Lamb, that put them over the top. I mean, that CeeDee Lamb is everything you want in a creative wide receiver in the NFL right now. Like, he is a guy that they will find multiple ways to get the football to, and now that offense is going to be very difficult to stop. But once the Eagles decided to take that first-round receiver and Jalen Reagor out of TCU, that put them back on top of the Dallas Cowboys. This is why. Max, you talked about the Eagles' offensive line. That's still a strength. I think that Jalen Reagor is going to end up being a really good pick for the Eagles. I know the fans wanted Justin Jefferson, but the vertical juice that Reagor is going to bring to that offense. I did a TCU game a couple years ago. He was the best player on the field. He was the most explosive player on the field. He was the guy that was like, how many times can they get him the football? I kind of see him having an impact similar to like a Santonio Holmes or a Percy Harvin type of player, and that's exactly what this offense needed. Listen, the Cowboys had a top 3 offense in the NFL last year. So, like, adding CeeDee Lamb is great. That defense is going to be bad. I mean, they better hang 35 points a game on everybody because that defense that was 18th in the NFL last year, they lost 4 of their best players. 4 of their top 8 players are gone. And so you took a defense that was technically below average, and now you've taken some of your best players out of that defense. That's going to be the weak part of their football team, and that will have an impact on that dynamic. Their secondary right now is doo-doo. I mean, they're going to have 300 yards a game hung on them and their secondary. And so while I love the CeeDee Lamb pick, as I sat there and watched the Eagles get the vertical juice on that offense, and think about this now, because we're talking about the Cowboys receiving core with Blake Jarwin and Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb. That's great. But what happens if Deshaun Jackson comes back and is healthy? Then you got Deshaun Jackson. You now have Jalen Reagor. You can still have Alshon Jeffrey. You've got Zach Ertz. You've got Goddard. You've got Miles Sanders. That offense just as explosive as Dallas, and the Philadelphia Eagles defense is significantly better than the Cowboys. So the Eagles, at the end of the first round, essentially vaulted back on top, being NFC favorites, NFC East favorites.
Max and Dan.
Yeah,
Max and Dan, before we move any further, I just wanted to point out something last night that was absolutely hilarious that I have to bring up. Desmond Howard was on ABC, okay?
Don't.
And when they showed the highlights, he went like this. He said he's a great receiver. He's got a potential. The numbers wasn't there because he had a very bad quarterback. Now, I don't know whether it was Max Duggan or whoever the hell it was because that was the guy that took the priority of the snaps at TCU. I didn't watch TCU last year. I didn't see them one time. But if I didn't know who that quarterback was, I damn sure know him now because Desmond Howard made a very, I don't know who could have done it better. He said he had a very bad quarterback play. I said, damn, if you didn't know who the quarterback at TCU was before, you know him now, and you know that he's very bad because you never hear somebody say somebody's bad like that.
All right, we'll leave it there. No love for Danny Dimes or Saquon.
I mean, he's a true freshman at TCU, and he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the country.
I want to make a quick mention. Obviously, your partner in crime, Todd McShay, was not there. He's fighting COVID, and I just want him to know that we all wish him a speedy recovery. He certainly was missed. And, Mel, I want to start with the quarterbacks. Obviously, 3 taken in the top 6, and then that bad man, went to Green Bay. Mel, which quarterback is in the best position to succeed?
I'll tell you what, I think it's Joe Burrow to the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'll tell you, I was dismayed. I was upset at the audacity of some people to claim that the Cincinnati Bengals are the worst place in the NFL for a quarterback to go to. Do those people not realize that the Bengals have had 6 10-win seasons since 2003 when they drafted Carson Palmer? That's the same number as the Dallas Cowboys and more than the Chargers, Giants, and 49ers were in the Super Bowl last year. And do those same people not realize that the Cincinnati Bengals quarterbacks since 2003 have thrown 414 touchdown passes for 13th best in the NFL during that time period? That's not 32, 25, or 20. But people want to keep preaching that the Cincinnati Bengals are the worst place for a quarterback to go. I am incredibly upset by that kind of talk. And whoever said it, I want to talk to that person right now.
Well, you talking to him now. I mean, Mel, ain't nobody hiding. It would be me, Mel. I would be that guy. That would be me, Mel.
What a shocker.
I appreciate it. And listen, let's be very, very clear. and not willing to go all out to create a culture that basically exudes a winning environment. That was my issue. Nothing else about the Cincinnati Bengals. That might change under Zach Taylor. We haven't seen evidence of that yet. It might change, but historically, their culture, because of Mike Brown and that ownership, I mean, please, you can't defend that, Mel Kiper. You can't do it.
Yes,
It's a cheap ownership.
Stephen A., you're wrong. You're all wrong. Everybody's wrong. This culture has been to 2 Super Bowls. This culture was there with Mike Brown, with Kenny Anderson, with Boomer Esiason. I talked to Mike Brown prior to that draft in 1984. Boomer Esiason, a few years later, was in a Super Bowl that they almost won had it not been for that great drive in the final minute by Joe Montana. Wait a minute here. And then, after that, you mentioned Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis has had some bad luck. Carson Palmer was hurt against the Steelers, okay, early in that game. Vontaze Burfict with the penalty against the Steelers when they thought they had that game won. Like Marty Schottenheimer had bad luck with some fumbles in the Elway drive. Hey, you're not a loser when you have bad luck in the playoffs. You're not a loser when you lose that way in the playoffs.
Mel, you just brought up examples of what the Bengals were when I was at Thomas Edison High School in Queens, New York. I mean, come on,
it's the same culture.
That's in the 80s.
It's the same culture then as it is now, the way they do. Mike Brown is still good. Mike Brown, do you realize it's the same culture that was to 2 Super Bowls? 4 teams in the NFL have never been to a daggone Super Bowl. They've been to 2. Carson Palmer has success. Andy
there are
Dalton has
32
success.
teams.
Yeah.
Mel, there are 32 teams in the
What's the
NFL,
point, Max?
meaning every 16 years on average. If you're an average team, you should get to a Super Bowl every 16 years anyway. Every 32 years, you should win one. But those so four organizations are even worse. But the Bengals
but they're not brought up.
significantly below average. But the Bengals are significantly. The answer to the question, which quarterback is in the best position to succeed, is Tua Tagovailoa. He's going to a program, for lack of a better word, to a team that who looked like we were asking the question seriously. We weren't the only ones asking, is this Dolphins team going to be the worst team of all time? It looked like they quit, but they had a coach who got it together, and they traded away talent mid-season, some of their best players, but they got it together, rallied, won 5 games, including a must-win game for the Patriots on the last game of the season. Yeah, who's calling me?
Right.
Mel Kiper, hold on, Mel.
Yeah.
Mel Kiper Jr. brought up the Bengals, okay? And their success at a time when I showed up to school with a dashiki on. That's how long ago that was, Max. That's how long ago that was. The Bengals ain't been in the Super Bowl since 1988. Come on, Mel. Are you kidding me?
Listen. Don't talk. Just listen for a second. The Bengals have made the playoffs 7 times since 2003. 7 times since 2003, Stephen A. Only 10 teams have made the playoffs more than that. And that's since 2000. The Browns have had 0. The Raiders have had 1. The Dolphins have had 2. So only 10 teams have had more playoff appearances than the Bengals since 2003. Not 1893, 2003, Stephen A. So this
When's the last time they won a playoff game?
Living in the 80s is
When's the last time they won a playoff game?
They're in the playoffs. They didn't win. Marty Schottenheimer was a heck of a coach. He had bad luck. He didn't get to the Super Bowl. Would you rather be a team never gets to the playoffs, but nobody's going to talk about you? But how dare you get to the playoffs and lose? You got to be the worst in the league if you do that.
They're a below-average franchise. Right. I mean, there's no way around that. You could argue they're not as bad as advertised, but they're below average.
Don't single them out. Well, then there's a lot of below-average franchises in the NFL then.
Yes, there are some below-average franchises. They're one of them. Yeah. Can I get back to Tua for a second or no? Can we talk about Tua Tagovailoa for a second?
I'm not.
Tua is set up in Miami.
Go ahead, Max.
Tua is set up in Miami, a team that, as I said, showed the pluck to keep fighting late in the season. It looked like it was beyond lost, like it was going to be an historical embarrassment. They added pieces through free agency in the offseason. They go into the draft, get him a tackle, get him a corner. Now, these guys aren't like, this year they're going to be amazing. But this is a team whose culture is headed in the right direction and who now has potential stars at some of the most important positions. The Dolphins, not just this year, but over the course of this Tua rookie deal, are set up to challenge for a Super Bowl if Tua doesn't get hurt. That's the big question mark. But they set him up lovely.
Well, think about that division. Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, okay? We'll see what New England does. Those are two outstanding young quarterbacks. Tua comes in. That tackle you mentioned is a developmental left tackle, Austin Jackson. He's not ready yet. Two guys that beat him pretty good in pass protection. Two defensive ends, A.J. Epinesa and Bradley and I, are not even drafted yet, so he needs work. I said this morning, I would not play Tua this year. If there's football this year, I'm not playing him a snap. Mahomes didn't. I would medically redshirt him, let his body heal, not put him out there, let him get ready for 2021. Moving forward, as I said, in that division, you got two top guns and Josh Allen and Sam Darnold. Buffalo and the Jets. Jets are trying to build it. Buffalo thinks they're there. And New England isn't falling back too far. So this is going to be a great division, a fascinating division to watch. I would not play Tua at all this year. I wouldn't let him have one snap under center.
I can't just summarily dismiss Justin Herbert and where he ended up. This guy's going to end up with the Chargers. You got Keenan Allen, you got Mike Williams, you got Hunter Henry, you've got some team. You lost Melvin Gordon, but you still got some weapons offensively, and we know what their potential is defensively if you can just move the chains and give them some kind of offense to supplement them or support them in some way. So I think that we can't ignore Herbert and what he could potentially mean to the Chargers as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Mel,
there's
all
a
I know
Tyrod
is this: you
Taylor's
can
a
join
bridge,
us
right?
on. Mel, you can join
Good,
us on
Mom.
3 hours of sleep anytime because that argument deserved a